Coach, hey, thanks for joining me today on this simple coach-to-coach interview. Do appreciate you taking the time. You, sir, are indeed a rookie to the channel, which is awesome. But also more important, I don't want to say more important, but for me, it's very important. You are the first, maybe that's not rookie status, but you are the first NJAC coach who has been bold enough to hop on the channel and be in the hot seat. So I wish you all the best. But thank you very much. Thank you for that. thanks for taking the time.
No, Paul, thanks for having me. Really appreciate this.
Okay. So let us begin with what I like to do with rookies is, can you just talk about your soccer journey? How did you end up at NJCU?
Yeah, so I played in the conference. So I played at Montclair State University.
That's okay. All right, we have to work with that.
Yeah. We have some NJAC conversations ahead of us. So I played at Montclair State University. Got my degree in teaching. Went to go teach elementary PE, and a club coach mentor asked me to go into the youth game at a club in New York City called Asphalt Green. So I traveled there doing the youth coaching, doing the technical director roles. And around the time that I graduated high school, my assistant coach, who's now the associate head coach at Montclair State, guy by the name of Joe Cullen, took over the NJCU job, and he asked me to come on staff with him at NJCU straight out of college. So we went on a 5-year journey from about 2016 to about 21. And then I had the opportunity to go into the head coaching sphere alone. So I stepped away from the men's game and went into the women's game at College of Staten Island. And I oversaw their transition into Division II. And then around the time finishing my second or third year at College of Staten Island, the NJCU job opened up with Joe Cullen returning back to our alma mater at Montclair State University. Mm-hmm. So I did the youth and college scene as a split for 7-8 years to kind of get my feet wet, do all the hard work, do all the grinding, do all the having multiple mentors that were hard on you. Yeah. And then luckily enough, when the opportunity arose to come back in the NJAC, I was fortunate to get the call from NJCU.
When you graduated, it was did you want to be a coach? Was that your thing, or were you just sort of, this might not be the right way to describe it, like just sort of fumbling through things until all of a sudden you were like, hey, I can make a career of this?
No, I think I always knew I wanted to teach sport, right? The first dream was the elementary educator, like Mr. Guzman's gymnasium. It was going to be the coolest place on planet Earth, right? And then what I found out is, I fell out of love with I think the educational system. I saw resources in the classrooms I were in versus resources that maybe peers were in. And I said to myself, if I wanted to be able to teach or coach full time, I want to be hands-on with the product, and the product that I found myself looking at was soccer. And then I was fortunate enough to have mentors that were hard on me and mentors that saw value in my coaching abilities and my abilities to motivate. And they gave me the opportunity to kind of go on staff as the young guy. And to your rookie standpoint, that's kind of been the MO for me, is kind of the young guy that is willing to do the legwork, willing to do the extra things. And luckily enough, people have valued kind of the skill set that I've been able to create.
So you mentioned it twice, and I'm already down a rabbit hole, and because I'm really curious, of all of the 100+ coaches that I've talked to, no one's ever talked about their mentors as being hard on them. Could you explain that, what you mean by, and don't get me wrong, I actually think that is a part of mentorship that I don't think gets talked about enough, is somebody who's demanding, I'm assuming hard on you, meaning demanding on you and expecting more than what you think you're comfortable giving. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that. I'm really curious on this one.
I think I started coaching so young, right? I was 18 to 24 when I really started to get my feet wet in coaching. Found out really quickly that the playing career wasn't going to be as long as I thought it was going to be. So, fortunate enough that club coaches and um, technical directors of the clubs I were at kind of saw value in me and kind of gave me all the harder responsibilities. And I was fortunate enough to be kind of the person that would say yes to every kind of opportunity that I was able to get. Um, and as a result, I think when you're able to do good work, and we say this with players often, if like you're doing good work and the goals are rising and the standards are rising, as a result, then we have to push you higher
Mm-hmm.
than the standards that you've created or you've set. So I was fortunate enough to have mentors that were really demanding, mentors that really wanted to see me succeed and were willing to kind of give me the moments to have baptism by fire or put me in the deep waters and see if I would drown. And um, along the way, they gave me the skill set to be able to do that. But I'm fortunate for those guys
Yeah.
because they helped create my network. They helped
Yeah.
create moments of frustration or moments of doubt or moments of growth and insecurity that you kind of battle through as a coach, right? You get to a point where you got to get over the imposter syndrome, right? You got to get over
Yeah.
those tough moments, and without mentors that kind of push you into that finding yourself or finding the coach or finding your coaching philosophy, I don't think it can be done.
Yeah. I do think, right, what's really interesting about that is like good mentors treat you like I always in when I was knee deep in coaching, right? Like I wanted my practice time to be 10 times harder than game time so that when you got to game time, oh, this is awesome, right? Like, and I like in that the mentorship is of sort of driving you until the point comes to when it's game time for you that you're able to deliver because it's turns out to be easier in air quotes than what any of your before that was. So that's really really interesting. I'm just curious. All right, so now this is trouble. Um, it's a unique way of looking at it, right? Of sort of somebody driving you early, young. Like, do you translate that into your current way of coaching? Now that you're the guy in charge, right? Like this is your program. Like how much of that is in the way you treat your student athletes?
I think coaching philosophy myself. I try to have a nice balance of being approachable, but I am a product of old methodologies, right? I am a product of traditional coaching. And
Yeah,
and I was the player that worked well with that, right? Like I
yeah,
liked when coaches yelled at me. I liked when I had those prove me wrong moments with
yeah.
coaches. And um as a coach now, I see the players do want a hand around the shoulder maybe a little bit more, or do want the one-on-one individual conversations a little bit more than me as a player. I didn't get those, or I got the
Hmm.
collective nice conversations, or I got the hard on me conversation. So to find a nice balance where you're able to relate to the player, right? Because I'm not too far out of the
Hmm.
emotions that they felt, or even my upperclassmen, right? My fifth years, I got some 23, 24 year olds, right? We're relatively close in age, or they're close to my siblings ages, right? And you're able to then have a more honest conversation because you can be empathetic. And I think a lot of times coaches, we have to be empathetic and sympathetic. And I think
Hmm.
sometimes in the college game, it's hard to do that, right?
Hmm.
Because you're worried about the next result, or you're worried about
Yeah,
this
yeah.
next action. So being able to kind of be approachable, but still be able to layer in kind of those traditional coaching models that helped me succeed as a player and a coach is
Hmm.
important.
Yeah. Really interesting. Really, this is fascinating. We could do a whole segment on the psychology of that coaching aspect. Like your experience going through the game and then trying to teach it back. How do you do it? Anyhow, hey, all right. Why NJCU? Aside from your association as the assistant and that sort of where, is there is was there something about NJCU that I know guys. I've talked to coaches who they're declined going to become a head coach of their own program at a younger age and thought that they needed more experience in sort of working through the hard stuff, right? Being an assistant and sort of going that and waiting until they had a little bit more maturity. So I'm just wondering, one, why NJCU, and why were you ready to make the jump?
I think around the time that I left where I had the in between job where I went to College of Staten Island, around that time, I think as a coach, I was feeling like I was the best Robin in the world, and I think I wanted to go be Batman, right? And that's the best way I can describe it. And then you find out all the things that Batman has to do, right? And so I think for those 3 years, I was fortunate enough to take a Division III roster and then go into Division II, where we were playing, big schools, SNU, Franklin Pierce, these types of schools. And there's a initial shock value, right? And I think I needed that. Like, I needed the shock value of, like, it's the player that's like, oh, I know I can coach, right? I can come up with a game plan against that team, and then you're the guy that has to do it, right? And the conversations get harder, the planning gets harder, the longevity of those plans get harder. So around that time, I was able to get those skills. I was doing the recruiting scene. I was really into the youth soccer scene, coaching 2 or 3 teams, doing the technical director roles. And I was kind of doing the legwork, head down, and really did the learning, right? Like, bought into the craft and really doubled down on my learning. So around the time that Joe Cullen was heading back to Montclair State, I was fortunate enough that I was definitely one of the top candidates for the role. And it was just one of those roles that you couldn't turn down, right? Going back to the NJAC, I think it's such a prestigious conference, right? Like, soccer wise, the style of soccer fits the style of coaching that I like, right? And I thought it was a great step into the head coaching sphere, or that next level of high level coaching, or college coaching, or whatever the next steps are after hopefully my tenure here.
Speaking of NJAC, I think if you're from Jersey or have played in it, you appreciate, I don't know if that's the right word, but you appreciate the intensity of the NJAC. Could you just talk a little bit about it?
Yeah.
The other schools in it, everyone's familiar, obviously, with Montclair because of the success that they've had, but I mean, it's a brawl between anyone in the NJAC, right? I think that's the reality. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a Jersey kid, Clifton kid. So you grow up I'm 6 minutes from Montclair State, right? And all the teams generally are so close in geographical sense that everyone knows everyone, right? Myself as a player, I was recruited to 4 to 5 of the schools within the conference. So naturally, there's this personal rivalry that kind of comes into it. And then I think the style of play of the top teams force everyone to kind of play a physical style, play a demanding style, play a direct style. So if you're unable to match it, or if you're unable to deal with the directness of the conference, it could be a tough lull for you, just generally speaking.
Yeah, it definitely is, right? Like, I always joke, it's like, it's mob wars, like, it's just a way to, it's just
the story.
Yeah, it's what it is, right? Like,
the story I tell, my goalkeeping coach was a personal friend of mine that I brought in. He played at Endicott, so he played in that conference with Roger Williams and those types of teams. And our first conference game ever was like a 40 foul, 12 cards, craziness, right? Like one of these games where the whistle is nonstop, referees are having conversations with players, coaches are having conversation with players and referees, and it's tough. It's a physical game. And after the end of the game, everyone was like, high-fiving and giving hugs. How you been, man? How's everything going? and he looked at me, he goes, we just went to war for the last 90 minutes, and now everyone's high-fiving and everything else. And then typically we go, hey, you want to do it next Wednesday, or hey, you want to do it next Saturday? And so that's the way I describe the conference.
That's very true. Like you said, everyone knows each other. They're very not. I haven't looked at the rosters lately, but a good portion of everybody is from New Jersey. And if you're anybody in the game, you just knew. At least when I was playing, right? You knew all of the guys who were like the serious ball players, right? Like the ones who you knew, oh, you're going to be playing, you're going to keep playing, you're really intent on it. And it is true. You go out there and you sharpen your studs and you play, and then afterwards it's like, hey, how are things, what's going on, when are we getting together, like it's just really strange dynamic. um all right, so I've been meaning to ask you, so c- c- I, NJCU to me is a little bit of a unique, right, school, right? Location, sort of the in comparison to everyone else in the NJAC for the most part, I think. Um, I mean, is there something about NJCU that it is unique, or am I missing something there in terms of? And I'm thinking in the context of when you go on a recruiting trip, right? Like, how do you talk about NJCU when in the NJAC, and you know I think people default to, oh, NJAC, Montclair, College, New Jersey, and Rowan, I think is where people's mind is at. So,
Yeah, I think in the recruiting sense, we voice it as we are never going to be the Man City, the Real Madrid, the Bayern Munich, right? That's the conversation,
yeah.
right? That is truly the conversation. We voice it as you are coming here to compete as the mid-table team that's looking to do something special.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is it going to be perfect every year? Probably not, because you're going to need a a talented class that helps propel the next groups forward, or is able to kind of get the experience in order to teach the younger groups how to compete at a good level. And that's kind of been the goal, right? That's always been kind of our recruiting goal. So naturally, the university caters to students that are first generation, caters to students that may come from not traditional academic backgrounds, right? Students that are going to be the first in their family to hopefully get a college education degree. So as a result, because of where the cost of education is for NJCU, we look at those types of environments. We
Mm-hmm.
look at those high end players in those environments that are going to be the first, person in their family to get a degree. And when I ask my locker room, hey, who's going to be the first male in their family to get a higher education
Mm-hmm.
degree, 90% of the locker room raises their hand.
Mm-hmm.
On my coaching staff, out of my 5 coaches, 4 of us were the first um, male in their family to get a higher education degree. And I think we look for players that are similar to us. And fortunate enough, being from Clifton, understand what areas are going to have the player profile that fits your university. Unlucky for me, a lot of other universities in the NJAC have a similar, makeup of the player they're
Yeah.
recruiting, right? We're
Yeah.
all recruiting the same player. So it is, telling a player, hey, you can come to us and find those minutes that you might not find at the upper echelon of the NJAC,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to create a team based on that. We've really started to look into the transfer portal. Naturally, we're very kind to transfer students at NJCU. So as a
In
result,
general, you mean that in general at
yeah,
NJCU?
yeah.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
general, all of
Yeah.
NJCU, we have a lot of we have a lot of relationships with community colleges that we all their transfers credit
Mm-hmm.
transfer over, right? All these kind of things that are catered to helping the student in the transition. We cater to. So fortunate enough, a lot of my roster is also your local kid, than it is your maybe your high profile player that might have fallen through the cracks
Mm-hmm.
or needs a place that they can kind of finally get their feet set in
Mm-hmm.
college football. And then the opposite end is the transfer or the international pool.
Mm-hmm.
We've been fortunate enough that um, students will transfer in from another university, or the international pool has favored coming to New York City or coming to a college that is a 14-minute train ride to New York
Yeah,
City.
I don't think. I mean, you're located in the heart of Jersey City, and I don't unless you've been around. Like it is quite the diverse place. Like as much of a diverse city location as even New York City, if not in some cases more so, just because of the. I think New York is priced out just about everybody, so it just ends up being Jersey City is becoming the beneficiary of, hey, we want to be close to the city, or we're comfortable in the urban environment, and it becomes a natural place to look to. All right, is your I think your second season, correct? This is
Yeah, this
your
is my second
yeah.
season
What
as the head coach.
yeah. So how much would you say, this is a weird question, but how much would you say this program is yours? And I don't mean that in a bad way, but like there's like legacy things that you're inherited, right, or wrong, like good and maybe bad, and that you're just trying to transition to basically put a stamp on it. But how much would you say is yours versus your predecessor versus just sort of the things that you're trying to, I'll just say, sort out?
Yeah, when I came on staff with Joe Cullen in 16, we got the program from a 1-17, and then the season before, I think they were like 1-18. And we switched the scheduling around, and Joe Cullen made amazing steps in those next 5-6 years of really getting us to 500, getting ECACs as a normal stepstone
Mm-hmm.
for us. And just kind of getting our legs back into a competitive place in the conference, considering around 2007, 2008, the school had success, right? We were able to kind of make the NCAA tournament and able to kind of push a little bit further in the NJAC tournament more consistently. And then we go through some recruiting woes, and then Joe Cullen comes in and really has to rebuild the
Mm-hmm.
foundation. I think that was the hard part,
Mm-hmm.
and that was 100% Joe Cullen.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came in, or when I finished, kind of stopped recruiting players around year 5, year 6, or stopped having conversations with where players were
Mm-hmm.
and started to pivot into the women's game. um, there's 3 years that a successor of me in the recruiting director
Mm-hmm.
role or the recruiting coordinator role was now bringing in a player. Fortunate enough, Joe Cullen had created such an amazing foundation that the player talent pool was getting higher, and we were rising in the
Mm-hmm.
type of player we were able to bring in. So when I came in last year, the foundation was really already settled,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I said that when I came in, I wasn't trying to replace the furniture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wasn't trying to rebuild the foundation. Joe Cullen had done such a good job of that. I think for me, these last 2 years have been really building off of that
Mm-hmm.
foundation that was created over the last 8 years. So I think I was fortunate enough to help lay some of the concrete and help you know build some of that foundation. But I also now feel like I have the pressures of having to build on this foundation
Mm-hmm.
that was created by someone that I admire and went through this journey with, of trying to get this program back to a competitive place in the NJAC.
Yeah. What do you have any like? Do you have a? You're obviously always building, right? I'm just curious. Do you have sort of a mindset or a sense as to like, hey, this is where I want us to be, and this is what's going to prove that we're there? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, I think for us the goal is consistently be in the NJAC playoffs and consistently be in ECAC playoffs. Um, until we're doing that consistently,
Mm-hmm.
we're building,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that's the goal for us, right? Hopefully one day we can pull off the Leicester. Hopefully we can pull off the Marseille. Like, hopefully we can pull off the Bayer Leverkusen. Like, that's the goal.
Yeah.
That's the dream goal. But I think for us to be proud of our work at a consistent value or a consistent rate, I think it's being in the ECAC playoffs consistently and making the NJAC playoffs
Mm-hmm.
consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And the teams we recruit are doing that, right? Like, Keene does that.
Yeah.
Rutgers Newark does that. Rutgers Camden does that.
Yeah.
and they would be comparable to the recruiting classes that we have to
Yeah.
recruit. So I think there is a blueprint.
Yeah.
I think it's being able to do it at NJCU more
Yeah.
consistently has always been the goal of ours.
I'm actually supposed to speak with Tom Osborne. Tom Osborne? Yeah.
Uh,
At Camden.
yeah,
Um, at,
Oz,
at
Oswald.
yeah, at some point here in the next week. We are supposed to do it this weekend. Things got a little complicated, but um, yeah, you know what? They made it to a Final Four, maybe
Yeah,
like
they did the semis.
semis. That's it. Yeah. The in few years ago, and you're right. Like there's and Camden's another sort of very similar. I don't know, it's similar, right? There's the as NJCU, right? It's from my perspective, just a unique place in that if you can get the right people in, you're right. Like you totally have the opportunity to compete at a level, right? And as long as you get to that, like you said, that sort of hey, we're always here, we know it, and you just need that bounce of luck, and things happen, right? Like so. Um, but let me ask you how as season two, how do you think it went for you? What are your thoughts on how your season went?
I think obviously we're disappointed in the season. Even when you look at the overall record, not even the 0-4 in the conference, you're disappointed. But I think we had such a changeover in how many seniors and how many players I think we were replacing going into, the whole fifth year and COVID piece. That we brought in a massive class, right? We brought in 22 new guys, four of which were transfers, and 18 were true freshmen, 18-year-old
Wow.
freshmen. And at most games, we were playing eight newcomers. So we took a risk this year in recruiting players that we knew were NJCU guys, but their talent level might have been high, but their experience or the transition into college football was still at question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really showed.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed in late games and moments. It showed in being disciplined and
Mm-hmm.
mature. It showed in the competitive edge, right? Like being
Yeah.
understanding the
Yeah.
NJAC, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're not good at first and second balls, it doesn't really matter how good your tactical
Yeah.
football is or
Yeah.
how technically sound you
Yeah.
are. And we got shock value in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a result, it hurt us. And then I think when you're scheduling in the NJAC, it's always so difficult, right? You don't know how good the NJAC is going to be, right? Like we don't know how good, the top five teams
Yeah.
are. And then as a result, you're questioning the scheduling. Do you top load it and you play your John Hopkins, your
Yeah.
Swarthmores, your
Yeah.
your out of conference juggernauts
Yeah.
to prepare you for the NJAC? But what happens if you go 1-6 at the front end?
Yeah.
Then at the back end, you could have a season like we had this year, and
Mm-hmm.
then you'd be in a really bad spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a funny little game you play with scheduling, and I think it's a funny little game you play with the recruiting. With the hopes that you have an experienced group. But I think the way I described this year, and I describe it to my coaching friends and even some of the your upperclassmen, was the coach in me loved this year,
Mm-hmm.
right? We learned a lot. We started to create, a disciplined culture.
Mm-hmm.
The locker room was an amazing place to be in. Upperclassmen enjoyed coming to training and coming and playing their final years. And then you had freshmen that really wanted to learn. Like they were asking millions of
Mm-hmm.
questions. And I think culturally it was a great place. So the coach in me says, this is amazing long term.
Mm-hmm.
This is amazing for the growth of the program. This is amazing for the growth of the locker room. But I think the competitor in me was very pissed off with the abilities
Yeah.
of us to finish out games or the ability of us to find ways to win, or just the overall lack of inexperience that might
Yeah.
have hurt us in, the 90th minute or hurt us in a conference that is, at war, is a juggernaut in battle.
Yeah. You know what? Like, truth is, like the Rowan's the top end, right? They're not laden with freshmen, right? You
No.
know what I mean? Like they got
Yeah.
experience on their side, and that's probably 50% of their battle. They know exactly what they're getting into every single game, and I think that's part of the issue with freshmen, right? Is that they don't. They can hear it, they can see it, but unless they experience it, they're not. It's not going to take, right? And I think that's for any ball player, right? Like I think that's the. So if you're on a young end of a team, I always say, and I'm always find that interesting, right? Like, and in 2 years or maybe even next year, again, the ball bounces the right way for you in certain situations, you're going to be in a great spot, right? Like I think
Yeah.
that's as a general rule across any program is just the maturity of those freshmen. So, um,
Yeah.
well, I'm curious, what would you say was the best game you guys played this season? Or that you felt like, man, they tuned in, they could, all of those non-quantifiable things were there, and you're like, oh my God, we captured it for this one game, and we got to hold on to it.
Yeah, I think we had a great game out of conference against Sarah Lawrence. They're in the Skyline.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had a fantastic game against Manhattanville, which was an NCAA, opponent
Mm-hmm.
that we wanted to get on the schedule because they were playing good
Yeah.
football, and it was a great early test for us. And I have a great relationship with Sean Riley, the head coach over there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to go there and impose our will and press the
Mm-hmm.
game and be an NJAC team and
Mm-hmm.
and be able to, be on the front foot for 90 minutes. And we saw amazing things at a conference as we started to build up. But as we started to get closer and closer to the conference, I think you have the woes of every season, right? Like you have roster changes, you have guys that are going in and out of form because there's so many games so quick.
Bruised
That
and
then you
battered,
get,
right? Like,
yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
100%.
yeah,
And then you get to the conference, and we opened up this year with Montclair away, Rowan home, Stockton home. So, we had the first three out of the gate that were all in form and all playing good stuff.
yeah,
I mean, Stockton at the time wasn't in form, but look at the way they ended the
yeah,
season,
yeah,
right? Um, and then you go into those games, and we kind of said all year we were one performance away
yeah,
from it clicking,
yeah.
right? And I think we had so much evidence in certain moments, right? We had good defensive performances, and then we'd have good attacking performances, or we would have good moments where we circulated the ball well, but I don't think it ever truly clicked.
Yeah,
And by that time we got to the conference games,
yeah,
and I think we battled really well against Montclair. Kind of went in with a defensive minded game plan, try to sit in our own half, hit them on the counter type of deal.
yeah.
Two individual moments hurt us, and then the next game we had Rowan at home and true NJAC battle home. Had them late in the game, and Johnny Triano, who's probably the best
Yes,
goal scorer in our conference
yeah.
this year, peels off the back
A
shoulder, head one's
natural.
back across.
Kid's a natural.
Yeah,
Finds the
yeah,
back of the goal on the net.
yeah. He gives me Alan Shearer vibes where he's kind of like not in the
Yeah,
game for 90
yeah,
minutes,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden
There he
it's two
is.
goals, and you're
Yeah,
like, how did that
yeah,
happen? And I think the NJAC to that conversation is it's a goal scorers
yeah.
conference, right? Like, last year Montclair had Amir Lukovic, who's player of the year. You had Johnny Trejo in
Mm-hmm.
that same conference
Yeah.
that has, 14, 15 goals a season. Everyone in our conference typically has a 9, and I think that was a big portion of this year for us, was like we were constantly trying to find our 9 and trying to find an
Mm-hmm.
attacking group that would score consistently. And I think when you're inconsistent in scoring, then you're looking at 1-0 games, or you're looking at 2-1 games. And the experience in those games obviously helps keep you in those games.
So the reason why I had you on my list to talk to, aside from all the other NJACs, is because I've been purposely watching NJAC games, and I watched you guys play Medgar Evers. I wasn't there; I was on the
Yeah, yeah.
screen, um, and I was like, "Huh," like it was one of those games. That was one of those games where I'm like, "Huh." There's what I've been saying for a long time. Like it doesn't matter sort of where you rank. Like there's a lot of good soccer that goes on, and I thought that was a case where you guys looked 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 good, right? And I thought that's interesting. And I go back to NJCU. Like who knows about NJCU unless you're just sort of local, right? Like you're familiar with it. What I mean, what's the big? What would you say the biggest difference between this year and last year was? Your first year. Aside from the fact that you were still trying to figure out where the bathrooms were.
Yeah. Or how to redo the locker room,
Yeah.
right? And no, I think the first year you have a year of like, I always say that first year in transition when you get a new program, and this is kind of my second year of taking a program, um, and trying to build, right? Like not the high end program,
Mm.
right? The program
Yeah.
that is trying to use a great foundation
Yeah.
and become competitive. Um, is the, I think it's the understanding that last year, I think we had a lot of those foundational pieces and a lot of upperclassmen, right? We
Mm.
had juniors and seniors, and we had a good amount of players that had already, either were looking to break the college game and find a role where they're playing 900 to 1,000 minutes. Um, in comparison to this year, where most of our minutes were 5 or 6 guys on 1,000, and then the rest were
Yeah.
200 to 600. So I think the biggest difference between this year and last year is the foundation had settled, right? The foundation had started to understand how to compete. And I think we were 1 point short, right? Like we finished seventh in the conference, and we were just like right there in breaking. And it could have been, I think we got to do a better job of getting points against the teams that are relative to
Yeah.
us in the conference.
Yeah.
So like, getting results, losing in the 90th minute last year to Ramapo hurts you late in the
Yeah.
year. Losing 1-0 to Camden hurts you later in the
Yeah.
year. And those are games where you got to pick up points.
Yeah.
I think the way we describe it is the top two teams this year, Rowan and Montclair. Can you get points against them?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a win.
Yeah.
And then everyone else, you got to find ways to get points. And we always say the magic number is 13. And if you're 4 games in and you don't have any points, it's going to be very hard to
Yeah.
get 13 points in the final 5 games because all these other
Yeah.
teams want points,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that was the biggest difference. And I think the momentum of the season always hurts you in our conference,
Mm.
right? If you don't have momentum going into the conference, and then for us, we open up with Montclair and Rowan, and you give your all trying to get points to show people that, hey, we can compete against the top
Yeah.
end and we can do it consistently. That when those results don't come,
Yeah.
you find that the locker room is not as up for it for training
Yeah.
as you once had them up for it.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of rebuilding that,
Yeah.
the mentality piece, right? The mental conditioning this year was more than ever before, but we understood that knowing that we were going to have 18 true freshmen.
Yeah. That's a great point, right? It's just trying to, how do you keep guys focused through the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys, regardless of what the outcome ends up being, right? Like, okay, next game, we got to get back to it. Next game, how do we do that? And how do you convince guys of that? Because they're seeing the things that, right? Like, oh, you just lost 2 games out of the gate in the NJAC, and then how do you recover for that? Well, the truth of the matter is you don't, right? You don't recover from it. You just keep competing. And
Yeah.
I think, again, just to the comment about freshmen, right? I think that's one of the hard lessons that they have to learn. Like, it doesn't. What are you going to do? Pack it up? Like, if you're going to pack it up, then you have no business being in the locker room in the first place. If that's the first sign of adversity. But what what are you looking for now? Like, what's just a sense of sort of the types of players that you look for, that you would want to get on into your program to get you to that spot where you're at that level where, man, we're gonna, could be the year where we're punching above our weight. I mean that in a bad way, but like the Lester
Yeah.
model,
Yeah.
right? Like you're punching above your weight and it's surprising everybody and they don't know how to deal with it. Who are the types of players that you're looking for?
I think the first one is the players that fall through the cracks, or
Mm-hmm.
like the D1 or the high end transfers that are looking for a home.
Mm-hmm.
That's really who we start with, because those players are going to be our impact players, right? Those
Mm-hmm.
players are going to be our kind of our upper end players. And then I think you look at specific areas that have crops of players that might go under recruited, but also have a high talent level.
Mm-hmm.
So Kearney, Clifton, Harrison, like these areas have players
Oh my
by
God.
the park full,
Yeah.
right? And I
And
think
not
it's
even playing in anywhere you would see them, right? That's very true.
no
That's very true.
Sunday leagues,
Yeah.
like indoor places. A lot. I pick up a lot of kids going and doing the extra legwork at an indoor
Yeah.
tournament, right? And I think that is a lot of our recruiting, right? So a big portion of it is, can we get the high end player that might fall through the cracks, right? Or the player that is looking for a home? Because I think we've now created an environment that where that player can have a home. We start to look at the densely populated, high talent
Yeah.
soccer areas. And then fortunate enough, 3 coaches on staff of mine are fully engulfed in the
Local
New Jersey youth soccer
scene.
game.
Yeah.
So fortunate enough, we do have a decent size network that is able to kind of cast a net and have relationships with coaches that trust that we're giving the player a good student athlete experience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that's what we always talk about is, are they coming to a competitive environment where they're going to develop as a footballer?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the opposite end, are they coming to a university where they're going to get a student athlete experience that they can look back on and say, hey, I grew, I became a better person, I developed skills that helped me translate later in life. And I think that's kind of our recruiting class. And then when it comes to the specific player profile, like what is the type of player we're looking for, we kind of describe it in a, you know, in a kind of a checklist. And the first one is always leadership qualities. I think that's something that the recruits nowadays have great football and have great tactical ideas. They can do things with the ball and do things, and they watch so much football that they can do things that I could have never done as a player.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the leadership qualities and the grit and those pieces have fallen off a little bit as the talent on the ball has risen a ton. So we look for that. That's the big one. You know, how does he lead? Is he communicative? And then how does he lead in adversity moments? And then how does he lead when his team's killing it, right? Like when his team's 5-0 and he gets subbed out of his high school game, is he on the edge of the bench being the cool kid, or is he the kid that's still involved, right? So that's the leadership quality piece. And then the second thing is the physicality piece. Just in the NJAC in general, are you challenging for first and second balls? Are you trying to collect the second ball? And then those pieces that unfortunately we look at: can he hit the long ball? Can he challenge? Can he tackle? Does he enjoy defending? That's a big one for me. Defensive pride. I'm a center back by nature, so defensive pride becomes at the forefront. No, it does. It does.
I was a goalkeeper, so really my defensive pride was a little bit different than.
And so defensive pride, does he counter press when he loses the ball? Does he enjoy communicating and organizing, right? And then we talk about is like, does he have a little bit of ruthlessness to him? Does he have a little bit of that winner mentality, right? Like, I want to score the next goal, or I want to make the big play.
The intangible parts that you're right, you don't see players, the modern player. They might have all the technical skill in the world, but the intangible part, it's just, in a lot of cases, or it's not missing. It's just you have to find it. You know, like it's not just everywhere. That's something that you have to find.
And then when I think of like the technical and tactical profiles, is like, does he know how to press? Does he understand how to get into shape? Does he understand those kind of like those details where at club, most teams are playing 4-3-3. Most teams are playing playing football. And then you come to the NJAC, and in most of my games, I'm not going to have the ball, right? In most of my games, the opponent might have the ball, and it's your job to then create a plan that like is able to hurt them. So we talk about 10s all the time. Like, I watch players all the time. Technically, they're phenomenal. But when you're a team like myself, where in the big games we don't have the ball, do you really need a luxury ball playing 10? Probably not. And the same with the 6 role. Like, do you need a regista? Do you need a ball playing 6? Probably not. You need more of a Gattuso or a guy that covers ground. So player profile when we're recruiting is similar to that. We recruit a lot of 8s rather than recruiting 6s or 10s. We recruit a lot of 10s that can also play in wide areas. and you recruit a mix of nines that are either your hold up nine or your channel running nine.
Yeah.
But in reality, all the attacking players need to want to press,
Yeah.
need to want to defend, need to want to cover ground. And I think that's just a conversation that we have with the modern player fairly often, where they want to do all the things on the ball. They want to do all the things when their team's in possession. But in the college game, it becomes more transitional. And if you're unable to do the transition side of the ball, typically those teams lose games.
Yeah. The guys who love to pass the ball, love to connect, love all that stuff. But then it's like, you ready to get your socks dirty? Yeah. No. Okay. Like you can't afford. Again, I mean, you reference it. You can't. I'd say you can't afford to have players like that. At some point, you get to a level. Maybe, you have the luxury to go find that guy and be like, I just want a guy who's going to attack with the ball, and because you think you have the pieces to do everything else that you need. But but for the most part, that's a luxury that only. He's an outstanding player. Don't get me wrong, but Amir Lukovic works really well at Montclair, right? Take him out of Montclair and put him for you. Does he do the things necessary to help you succeed? And maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I don't think like the role he played at Montclair would fit for you necessarily. Again, it's on if all things being equal. So
Yeah, I think it's, are you willing to sacrifice
Yeah.
those defensive responsibilities for the offensive actions? And I think that's hard, right?
Yeah.
And I think Division III in general, right,
Yeah.
is an interesting level
Yeah.
because you have groups of teams that may not be talented but really compete and really organize and really understand what's their goal, what's their vision, and how do we hurt the opponent. And then you look at our conference, like I think Rowan and Montclair are two teams that talent level, we won't ever be able to match that talent level. But how can I match them on the compete value? How can I match them on the leadership value? How can I match them on the experience value? And that's where we try to find our edge.
Yeah. Almost like how can you compete against them as a team? Because individually you're not going to win those battles, right? Like, and so how do you compete as a team, and how do you do the things necessary to put you on the winning edge and throw them off, I think is right. And that's because otherwise, if you're fighting man to man, right, and player for player, guys coming on the bench, like you said, Montclair and Rowan, just they have such the depth and breadth of players that even their bottom end of their roster are just spectacular players that could fit into their game scheme, where you might not have that necessarily that benefit. But hey, I'm curious, how did you end up with a kid from Spain via Northland College?
Fortunate enough, our roster, our roster has been pretty good. I think the coaching staff from the time Joe Cullen taken over to now has done a really good job of creating a student athlete experience that they're now telling their friends about, or now is getting into the local scene or the local conversation of players. And we had a contingent of players that were from Uruguay, and we got a contingent of players that were from Mallorca, Spain. And they really, Jersey City, kind of around the time that the transfer portal kind of kicked off. I think our school saw an interest in the international student. So as a coach, you then tap into it. So we brought in a decent amount of players from Uruguay, Mallorca, and these types of places. And one of our players had an amazing experience. And when Northland College closed down, he called me and was like, "Hey, I got a teammate that I played with in Spain that his college in I believe Wisconsin, Northland's in, closed down." Very similar to kind of the other colleges around this area, right? Like Alliance and those just schools that are closing down. And based on where he was and based on his transcripts and based on kind of the situation he was looking for, it was perfect for us. So we've been getting creative with the recruiting scheme, no doubt about it. Same with Joao Autron, who's on that roster as well. We picked him up kind of he was playing Division II soccer in that Florida conference, right? I believe he was at West Florida, so with Barry in those conferences. Moved back up to Jersey City for family and reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I'd love to finish my footballing career." And those are kind of the relationships that we try to create and foster, with the hopes that we continuously get, high level players from certain nice little fishing ponds of recruiting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's I don't think people, again, I just go back to, I don't think people realize the location you're in. I mean, the right spot, you got the view of the city, right? Like, I used to work at Exchange Place for many, many years, right? And you are literally stone's throw away, anywhere in Jersey City, right? Liberty State Park, all that kind. You are literally a stone's throw away from the financial hub of the world for all intents and purposes. And I notice a lot of guys have finance degrees. Like you can't be in a better spot. I just think that's could be end up being a no brainer. But what do you see for 2025? I get it's early and you're still probably digesting the season and still doing whatever assessments, but what are your initial thoughts about 2025? Where do you think you go from here, and where do you hoping you're going to end up?
I joke that I think the preseason poll from this year was probably a year ahead of schedule or 2 years ahead of schedule, right? We got voted dark horse and we got voted 8th in the conference, and I think that's like kind of where we're headed, right? The dark horse was such a compliment to, I think, the work that this staff has done and the work that the players here have done to change the image of what NJCU has been in this conference. So the goal, I think, is to get back to that. I'd love to be considered the dark horse. I think this recruiting class put us in a place that foundationally we only have to pick up the pieces now, right? Like talent-wise, guys that are bought in, guys that see themselves in the village and the vision are bought in, and I think they'll be able to then facilitate the pieces that we bring in rather than another huge class. Like, fortunate enough, we won't have to bring in another big class. So as a result, I think it's breaking the NJAC tournament. I think when you look at the 0-9, I don't think it reflects the growth of the team throughout the year. I think it reflects the lack of experience that helped us in the tough moments or the moments of adversity throughout the season. I think we'll be able to overcome those moments more consistently next year. So as a result, making ECACs and breaking the NJAC playoffs is the goal, and any goal under that is kind of unacceptable.
Couple more, and then I'll let you get on with your day. What's your recruiting class look like? How are things shaping up in that? Again, it's early, so I don't know timing wise.
I think D3 recruiting is interesting, and I think recruiting at NJCU is pretty interesting because the timeline changes. We're at the point where you have a lot of players that are right on that cusp of low level D1s, right on the cusp of that high end Division III, and they're kind of making decisions right now. So we just try to show all the players that we're interested in how interested we are. We kind of get to this point and we start having more conversations on what it means to onboard and what it means to come in. So for this class, we're only looking really for, 3 or 4 specific positions. And this class is going to be relatively small. So hopefully we're focused on just the impactful players. We've kind of targeted the 20, 25 guys that we like in those positions and are really just being diligent about those guys. Fortunate enough, whether they're in our youth environments and we're having conversations or seeing them pretty often, or the kids that come from those amazing fishing ponds that we've already kind of started talking to their coaches and know where they are in the process, has put us in a position where this class, fingers crossed, will be rather easier than classes in the past. But in the NJAC, you never know, because, one of our players now who's played a good amount of minutes in the 9 role for us, we got him 2 years ago in July when things had completely changed about his recruiting process. So we kind of keep the process super open. Just NJAC in traditionally kind of keeps the process pretty open. But fortunately, this class is smaller pieces, and timeline wise, we're hopefully about halfway through this class right now.
Does that include international players, or right, or is that a little different just because of those? I don't want to say they come to you. They don't, so they can come whenever.
Yeah. I think the local player gets done around this time, right? We're having those conversations with the local player. We then look at the transfer portal, and we be really strategic about the players that we reach out to in the transfer portal. Typically, the players that are in the portal are players that we knew were going kind of in the portal based on kind of just your network. And then those guys reach out to us, and we start having that conversation. And then the international student is, like you said, it is kind of hit or miss depending on where they are in their own semesters and own season. So typically, this is a really big recruiting window, right? You got the tournament before Thanksgiving, you got the weekend after Thanksgiving. So all those kids that were playing high school soccer in New Jersey are now playing at their club team, and you kind of get a little bit more access to them rather than their high school teams. And then the international student or the transfer student or those types of students, they kind of start arising around January to March, because now they're starting to figure out the spring semester. And so we're really not slow in the process, but I think the Division III process and where NJCU is in the process is a slow burn in comparison to your, your Big Tens, ACCs, your Big East that are pretty much done already.
Done a year ahead of time,
Correct. So we wait for those players to fall to the mid majors and the mid, and then those players fall into the high end upper echelons of D3, and then that's when we kind of start our recruiting. So it's kind of timing the timeline based on that.
Do you think okay? Not the last question, but do you think like there's a? Do you expect, or have you already seen through the transfer portal, the impact of the limited roster size to 28? Or
I think the only place we have seen it is in the positions that don't hold as many players in that position, right? So like goalkeeper position, I think is going to be a position that gets hurt, and we're going to see the effects of it, right? You're not going to keep 6 goalies on your roster anymore. You're only going to keep the 4 that you need. So what happens to those other 2 goalies at all these Division I's that might have been getting practice minutes, but you're no longer going to keep them on your roster? And I think naturally we'll see the effects at D3 of, and we see it here too, of, you naturally over recruit at the Division III level. I think sometimes because of the retention and because of the, for me,
it's like an admissions issue. Not an admissions, 100%. But right? Like we need you to have 40 kids on your roster because we know they're going to be paying students, right? Like I think of course. That's the game now, right? For Division III, or a lot of Division III.
I think it's there's definitely the business of college athletics. And I think naturally our students deal with problems that the first generation student has to deal with, right? Like what happens if they can pay for the fall semester and then can't pay for the spring semester, and then they don't have the credits to be eligible for the following fall, right? That's not on me as a coach because the student can't financially be able to maybe afford education, but now that's something we're dealing with that's a little bit different about the retention cycles of our players. And as a result, you then over recruit. So I think the over recruiting in D1 is going to hurt, and you're going to see kind of a trickle down effect, right? And fortunate enough, I think we're going to be on the positive end of that. But I think in New Jersey, naturally, we were already in that effect because I think the player pools in New Jersey are just there's so many. There's so many. Every club team has 4 teams per age group. Every event is fairly close. Like I can go to a recruiting event every weekend within 2 hours, which is a great little hotbed to be in of football.
There's worse places to be than in New Jersey if you're just looking for talent, and it does go far further downstream in New Jersey than it does in others. It's respectable. Like if you're Iowa, your player pool is a lot smaller, whereas here you just have organized and, like we mentioned earlier, not organized opportunities for players to be seen. I think there's so much out there, so much. I'd always said, like, if I was ever in your position or somewhere, that's all I would do is I would look to New Jersey players, because you could find the combination of every combination of player that you need, you can find right here, and they don't have to go. They're 2 hours away. We're at farthest, right? So anyhow,
Yeah, I think like even you look at the makeup of my roster from Clifton, Harrison,
mm-hmm.
Carney alone, I have 12 to 15
Yeah.
players.
And they can go home every weekend, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, that's a great life to live, and you're getting educated, right? You're right near the city. You got all this exposure to different things, like, and you're playing ball. That's not a bad situation to be in. So
No, we describe that is the NJAC to a
yeah,
T, right? High level competitive
yeah,
football, a degree that you can use after
yeah,
college at universities that you can get a high end business degree, be in a great
yeah,
geographical
yeah.
location, and you get mom's cooking on at their game days, right? So we and it was the reason I went to Montclair State,
Yeah.
right? Like I was recruited fairly well, was at Matchfit and
Uh-huh.
did the whole DA scene
Yeah.
and got recruited like to good
Yeah.
universities, and it made sense for me to get a teaching degree because I
Yeah.
wanted to teach sport close to home, where they had just made the Final Four
Yeah.
the year before.
Yeah.
So it was a no brainer for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So, and then I was fortunate enough to make the NCAA tournament 4 years as a player and
Yeah.
have 2 Elite 8s, and
Yeah.
I was commuting to class that was 6 minutes away.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. And there's a lot. I got to believe it's everywhere, but particularly New Jersey, right? Where in this tri-state area, I'll just say very broadly, I think, like, it's hard to go somewhere else, right? Because everything you need is quite possibly right here. From the businesses that you're interested in, there's so much going on right here that you don't have to go far. Whereas, again, there's great things that happen elsewhere, but in some other places, that's not the case. Well, if I really want to work in finance, I got to somehow figure out how to get up to this, New York City and a couple other places. And so,
No, I agree. I think even as the coach as well, you're around you're around high level coaches, right?
mm-hmm.
Every
Yeah,
every every weekend I'm around high level
yeah,
coaches, and I think being so close to New York City and starting my coaching tenure in the youth game in New York City kind of opened my eyes to the gamut that
yeah,
is youth soccer, the gamut that is American soccer, and kind of where you are in that scale, and how big it truly
yeah,
is.
yeah. All right, Coach. This was fantastic. Really did enjoy the conversation. It's really, yeah. It's like I felt like I was talking to somebody from home. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, finally somebody who gets it.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
It
Appreciate
was
that very
awesome. It
much.
was awesome. Do appreciate it. I like having people on second, third, fourth time. So maybe before the season, if you're up for it, we could do another one and just talk about as you're getting ready, and sort of things are a lot clearer for your upcoming season. But in the meantime, I wish you and your men all the best, and get to recruiting. All right, like
Get
that.
get getting on the
Yeah,
trail. No, I appreciate it.
yeah.
Thank you for the invite, and thank you for letting me be the first NJAC
Carry that badge
guy
with
on the hot
honor.
seat.
Yeah, yeah. It
So
was
so I'm
hard,
I'm
wasn't it?
definitely gonna wear that badge.
Totally, totally hard, wasn't it? You're sweating. I can
Oh,
see it. I can see
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Super nervous on the Wednesday.
Yeah.
No, so
All right.
appreciate it. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Paul.
Appreciate it.
Have a good day.